Hello, humans, and welcome to another episode of Gen X Gamer. Today, an episode that I've been working on for a few weeks now. And I write things down and I go back to it back and forth. But it is the ship of Theseus and the Donkey Kong machine. And I decided to finalize it once Billy Mitchell put his video out. Because before then, nobody had actually really talked about it. And now he did it. Now that he did it in the context of his legal case, I think it's a good time to bring it up. Now, let me start off with saying this. I'm going to give you some background regarding my manufacturing background and give you insights on that. So it's going to go a little bit deeper, right, than just opinions and what everybody else says that just are reacting off the cuff. So let's go here. The ship of Theseus and the Donkey Kong machine. What makes an arcade game original? Right. Suppose you replace every part of a Donkey Kong arcade cabinet, including the joystick, screen, circuit board, and power supply, one by one until all the original components are replaced and none remain. Is it still the same game? This isn't just a philosophical riddle that was made popular by the Vision in the Avengers movie, right? It's at the heart of one of the most contentious debates started in the time of Greek philosophers, and now it's embedded right in classic arcade history with these replacements that people so much talk about. It involves none other than the beast himself, Donkey Kong, right? With Billy Mitchell, the hotly debated former holder of high scores in Donkey Kong and Pac-Man. At the center of the controversy is a question, not of scorekeeping, but of authenticity. What is an original arcade machine in 2025? Let me ask you. Is it the hardware? Is it the gameplay? Is it the history? Right? Let's walk through this and dive into the controversy of what is an original arcade machine these days. I have to lay down this argument in parts because number one, it's so fascinating, right? I've been thinking about it for a while, and I've been writing things and making notes and putting them aside until I'm using them here today. And this famous thought experiment of Western civilization that's been around since the year 100, I think, just about. And this is the problem of identity over time, and it relates to several fields, not just one, right? One of them is metaphysics, right? What makes something the same over time? Is it the material? Is it the structure? Is it function? Right? Think of it yourself, right? Your personal identity. Think of your own body. Nearly all the cells in your body are replaced over a 7 to 10 year cycle, right? Are you still the same person that you were 15 years ago? My cousin is. He was a dick back then. He's still a dick. Technology and restoration. If a classic arcade cabinet or car is slowly restored piece by piece, is it still the original? Like my beloved lowriders back in the day, man, I love lowriders. But just like in cars, the more parts you replace, even though they look beautiful, right? Even though they look awesome, for somebody who's a purist, even though your lowrider looks amazing, it might not be worth as much as something that's completely original. Right? So let's get into part one. The ship of Theseus, identity over time. The ship of Theseus is one of Western philosophy's oldest recorded thought experiments. Plutarch, back in the first century, posed a dilemma like this. Suppose a curator in a museum preserved the legendary ship of Theseus, but as its wooden parts decayed, they were replaced with identical planks made of the current wood, right, that might have had better preservatives against rot. One by one, over years, eventually the curators and staff, over time, had replaced every component, right? Every component had been replaced. Is it still the same ship? Right? To complicate matters even further, imagine if somebody like the museum's caretaker, for example, loved the ship so much that he took all these discarded parts and put them together again. He reassembled the ship somewhere else. Now you have two vessels, one with the original but completely new materials, original design, new materials, and the other one was a shell of rotten wood that he put together as best he could. Right? To most people, the rotten one would be the original, and the museum had a replica. Which is the real ship? right? Which is the real authentic cabinet? That's what we're getting to here. We're going deep, humans, so buckle up your seatbelts. I'll give you some insights based on my professional background in manufacturing. Okay. So the ship of Theseus is a puzzle of continuity versus originality, a debate echoed today not in dry philosophy text, but in the hum of restored arcade cabinets and the roar of retro gaming controversies on YouTube and, of course, all of social media. So in part two, let's talk about Donkey Kong, the Donkey Kong machine, as a modern Theseus ship. Theseus ship. The Donkey Kong machine, used by Billy Mitchell in one of his disputed high scores, had a replacement joystick. Right? Let's just take that at face value, even though the picture has been questioned, whether it's authentic or not. Right? So, let's just let's just say, okay, it is authentic. He said that that's the machine. Okay, whatever. Critics claim that this disqualifies the machine, and of course, the score is not legitimate, specifically because the joystick appears to have 8-way capabilities as a standard stick, right, of that type. Mitchell counters that the joystick was a one-on-one functional replacement because it had restrictor plates, making it only a 4-directional stick, and that this kind of repair is common practice, which it is, right, even necessary due to the decay of original components over time. Now, whether the replacement is typical with this particular stick or other sticks, it really doesn't matter. You're replacing the stick, right? And there's no way to prove, right? I can't prove to you that there was restrictor plates or not because I can't see underneath the thing. Neither could a jury or a judge, right? This is why this is so hard to take into court, because they're just saying, well, you just assume that, right? You have to be able to prove it, within reason in order to get some sort of judgment, and you just can't if you can't see the parts. Now, he's not wrong, right? Nintendo has not manufactured Donkey Kong arcade parts since the 1980s, since the days of President Reagan, family ties and stuff like that. Every working Donkey Kong machine still operating today, right, is by necessity partially or entirely rebuilt. Just things get old and they need replacement. Now, restoration with modern parts leaves us with an efficient version of the ship of Theseus dilemma. It really does. If every component in the Donkey Kong machine is replaced with an identical equivalent over time until no original parts remain, is it still an original Donkey Kong arcade machine? Right? From a purist standpoint, perhaps not. But from a functional and competitive standpoint, Mitchell's counter arguments raise more troubling concerns if you were to go into a court of law, for example. If you feel so strongly that you wanted to sue him and you go into a court of law, these are the type of issues that are going to come into play, especially because you're talking about components and manufacturing procedures and all that, right? So if a joystick swap is illegal, for example, and that's your contention, why aren't restored monitors illegal, right? If you change the contacts or transistors or chip replacements, how come those aren't illegal? Right? This is where these things come into play, let me tell you, because give you a little bit of background here. Let's say this is an arcade machine here. Right? This is an arcade machine. You're going to replace it. This is all you have left. You have to replace everything inside. And of course, you may not find all the original components, because even if you're going to replace it with original components, if you get the original ones, they're going to fail just like the old ones. You have to rebuild it, right? You want to rebuild your old asteroid machine, and you do it little by little. You can't get original art, right? You have to get repros, or you have to repaint it by hand, whatever you're going to do. And then you put it back together and you have your machine, and you have, you if you're just an enthusiast, you put the best, buttons you have, the best, coin doors you have, whatever, and you restore it and it looks great. Functionally, it is an asteroid machine, right? And then if you're doing it for fun, that's that. Would it qualify as a competitive machine? Probably not, because we don't know what you did, right? But in manufacturing, if you're going to do it in a professional setting, there's certain things that come to play, right? So, for example, in blueprints, something that you're always finding in engineering, especially with older parts, And I'll give you some experience here, some professional experience. I worked for a company that made this particular aerospace part. And I have to be careful here because of NDAs. So they make this specific aerospace part that originally was made by 4 companies. Out of those 4 companies, one went out of business. So now only 3 companies made it. Out of these 3 companies that existed, one absorbed another one. So now there's only 2 companies. Right? Of the 2 companies that were left, one of them stopped making the product because they didn't want to deal with the new restrictions that some of the material that was needed to make the part, right? They didn't want to deal with any of that headache because all of a sudden California and other states passed new laws that make that material not usable anymore. So they just said, we're not going to make any of these products. We're done. So even though they were on the standard, even though they were qualified to make it, they refused to make it anymore because of the material. So then there was one. It was us, right? And that factory could have just stayed open just to make that one part. But over time, we had to get variances not only because the raw materials had changed. For example, there was a RoHS implementation. If you're into manufacturing, you know what that is. But it has to do with chemical compositions of stainless steel and other products, right? Just raw materials. There's new regulations that come into play. And now the original components that are listed on the blueprint can no longer be purchased, right? So we need to search for or equivalent. Well, how do you search for equivalent when the equivalent isn't made anymore, right? If what is in the things I'm talking about are like welding procedures, for example, the welding materials, some of them weren't available anymore. There were some parts, for example, there were some components that used to have asbestos in them, and of course you can no longer have that. So that was off the table. Replacements had to be made. So you can see how the similarities in manufacturing factor in here. We still have to make the parts, but we can't make them with any of the original components because it's not practical and it's nearly impossible to make them. Because you can't even send it out to China because these particular components are restricted to be only made in the US, right? Because of security concerns, national defense stuff, right? So that happens in industry all the time. You have to get equivalents. How does this relate to what we're talking about, right? Because you need to rebuild something. If you're going to repair something like this, and for example, if you want to fly this plane again, everything that you put on here has to be approved. But the approval, of course, in arcade machines, it's not the same. You make them up as you go. A lot of them has to do with the purist. But let's just say, let's go back to this over here. You have component tolerances. Back in the day, if you go ask, and you go ask any electrical engineer worth his salt that was around those days, he'll tell you that the original parts from the 1980s, they had tolerances of plus or minus 10, a 20% variance, in certain circuits and capacitors, when today the tolerances are much tighter. So even if you replace it one for one, the quality of the replacement is a lot better than what you had before. So it's not a one for one replacement. It serves the same function, but it actually performs better. Today's equivalents are far more precise, more stable, and usually the industry performs better. And that even comes to the joysticks. Let's say the original joystick manufacturer doesn't produce it anymore. Even if they produce it now, they have tighter tolerances than they did back then. Back in the 80s, you can find tolerances of plus or minus 30. That would be absolutely no problem to hit, right? Just so you know, a plus or minus 30 tolerance would be like, what's 30,000? Probably like a credit card, right? So the thickness of your joystick or the joystick head, right, or the piece of plastic that goes underneath could vary from width and length to diameter to the size of a credit card, right? That thick. Even though whoever's manufacturing must have hit nominal, which is, the theoretically perfect measurement, if you will, you could still vary from that and the parts are still good. So if somebody made parts that are a little thicker, a little thinner, they would still pass and they would still go out to market. You don't know who's getting which, but you've experienced it on your everyday life playing, arcade games where some games just felt better. The stick just felt better. Some sticks felt more sloppy, right? And what's the difference now? The difference now is that you have plus or minus 5 tolerances, right? So instead of being the thickness of a credit card, now it's the thickness of a piece of paper. That's a much tighter control. Is that going to make a difference? Absolutely, right? So in other words, your rebuilt Donkey Kong might look the same, but it runs cleaner, faster, more efficiently. That alone could shave milliseconds of response times for competitive gamers, right? More than enough to change score levels. Processor and logic timing. Replacements for classic CPUs and memory chips may differ in cycle timing, latency, or instruction execution behavior, right? They can get it close, but it's not going to be perfect. Nothing is perfect. Everything has to be within a tolerance, right? Even if the game ROM is the same, they put the same program in there, the chips may output signals that are more reliable or faster than the original components. CRT behavior, display lag, right? So think the original, you guys can double check this. Okay, it's not set in stone, but just for the sake of argument, all right? The original Donkey Kong machines used a Sanyo 20EZ. This is what I could find looking, right? But if you change it to a modern CRT tube, or even, right, even if you just use the same one and somehow you're able to refurbish it, but now you have to use new contacts to the specifications that are required today, right? Uh, different than the period. Today's parts are more accurate. They won't replicate aging phosphor behavior of horizontal sync drift, for example. So especially when it comes to monitors, especially if they've been replaced, can you guarantee that it's going to look exactly the same? No, you can't. Nobody can guarantee that. Right? That again, this is why it's so hard to go into court and say this item behaves like this. You could say that in the 80s, but do you have an 80s one? No. Then have you modified it in any way? Yes. Now you're into murky territory, right? And if you swap it for an LCD, right, as some do for fun, right, not for competition, for fun, you're introducing an entirely different display system with potential input lag or even low latency, right? Converters, whatever you're putting in there, whatever you do, it's going to be different. The joystick response and mechanical feel, what I was talking to you about, even a new old joystick of the same model may feel different, right, due to updated materials. Again, some materials have changed because of the chemical components, right? The spring could feel different because it might be tighter, or the machinists, right, the machine shops are required to write, to manufacture at tighter tolerances, right? So if I'm inspecting a project, I want my machinists, right? If I'm running a project, if I'm supervising a project, whether it's machinists, whether it's assemblers, whether it's engineers, I want them all to be shooting for nominal, right? I want that perfect theoretical um, number, the perfect theoretical width of the diameter of the stick, of the head, of everything. And there's going to be variance on that, and that's what I study. Is there variance in this? Are we going too low? Is it too thin? Is it too thick? Let's study this. How does it perform? Does it perform better if it's thinner? Does it perform better if it's thicker? Right? Where do I want to leave it? Am I going to ship parts even if they're a little thin but within tolerance? Yes, that's what factories do. That's what they've always done. But there's a huge difference in shipping something that's plus or minus 5 thousandths, or the width of a hair, for example, which is like 3 thousandths, or the width of a credit card, which is a lot more towards 30, right? And this directly affects precision, player fatigue, you know, it could be your hand cramps less, and it absolutely, right, absolutely changes the feel of a joystick, throw distance, actuation pressure, dead zone tightness. It's not a minor detail. It's not for a professional player. For us, we don't care, right? My kids don't care if they're playing on the big blue. They can't tell about lag or anything else. You know, they're 5 and 8. What do they know? But a professional player, they absolutely know, right? Just by looking at it, they'll know. Because it really affects precision and all the rest of the stuff that I just mentioned. Now, system integration and electrical noise. This is something we don't talk about, or is not even talked about at all. Right? Because if you take the machine and you rebuild the power supplies, you put in fresh wiring, right? Modern grounding techniques, they lead to less noisy machines, more stable and more predictable than a volatile power environment that we had back in the 1981s, right? That's not a bug. That's an upgrade. It's a better machine when you do that. So let's be clear. If you replaced every part of a Donkey Kong machine, even with so-called identical parts, you haven't recreated the original. You've built a modern replica with improved reliability, right? And potentially superior performance. That's what you've actually done. So now we have to be honest about this myth of purity, right? And I just need to call it out plainly because I see this done a lot. The idea that a Donkey Kong machine could be 100% original in general, not saying that there isn't any original machines out there, but in general, for competitive purposes, for the tons of arcades that are out there, for the players, okay, it's total fantasy. Something has to have changed because something always breaks. Unless someone cryogenically froze a mint condition cabinet from 1983 and that's what everybody's going to be playing in, right? Then that would be the original one, right? And never touched it again or modified in any sort of way. That would be the standard, right? If we could get it. But Billy Mitchell's critics and others' critics, right, want to draw this hard line around authenticity. But if they're being honest, the line disqualifies everyone because of what I just mentioned, because of the differences in components. Right? And I've never heard anybody talk about tolerances on the material, tolerances on on the chips, right? On the transistors, resistors, or anything else. Right? And these are a fact. Right? These are a manufacturing fact. We can't magically make parts from 1981 appear, right? If it walks like Donkey Kong, it plays like Donkey Kong, it is Donkey Kong, says the preservationist, right? Not if the stick, the screen, and the soul are all replacements, say the purists. But truth, both sides are chasing ghosts, right? Both sides are a little off. Those who argue who Billy Mitchell's machine was an original because of a replaced joystick, I asked, are you prepared to invalidate every Donkey Kong score since 1985 or whenever they stopped making replacements, right? Where you had to use alternatives or equivalents? Because the moment you start replacing planks on the ship, you're sailing the Theseus ship, whether you admit it or not. You know, that's the truth, right? Retro gaming, like all nostalgia, walks a fine line between preservation and performance. But if we preserve these machines, we must also preserve honesty about what they are now, not just what they were then. You can restore the game. You can match its behavior. But you can't unring, let me add this because I don't think it's adding it, unring the bell of time. Time passes for everybody, right? And it takes a toll on these machines. Every rebuilt arcade Donkey Kong is a new ship, even if it sails the same sea of competitive gaming out there. Suppose you replace every part of a Donkey Kong arcade cabinet, including the joystick, screen, circuit board, power supply, one by one until all the original components are replaced and none remain. Is it still the same game? Of course not. It's an improved version. This just isn't a philosophical riddle made popular by the vision, right? It's at the heart of this contentious debate. It really, really is. All right, guys. What do you guys think? You guys tell me. I'm going to finish up this article. I'm going to post it up. You guys are going to see this tomorrow. But yeah, this is a real interesting conversation. There's so much to dig into here, guys. There's so much. But it's a very interesting conversation. And I'm sure glad that we're having it, right? Because from a perspective of somebody that's been, playing Donkey Kong ever since it came out, and you see these improvements, do I want the improvements in home? Yes. But I understand the improvements at a different level than most people do. You know, the original parts are a finite amount of parts, and the less there are, the more expensive they get. And most people out there holding contests and having all these, you know, performances don't have access to them because it would be insane. Nobody's going to produce these few parts like they used to in the old days because, you know, you've got from Davenport machines, manual, lace and manual mill machines to automatic CNCs. The precision of what you make these parts from has gone way up. So you can no longer get that original feel, right? Those moments in time for us are gone. Now, those were the original machines. We're still having fun with them, but time forgives no one. All right, humans, I will catch you on the next one. Take care.